take you to the Opus and Olives information. All right, so for everyone else, again, my name is Jeff Kamen, and we are talking about The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. I usually like to begin with a little bit about the author and about the book before I call on you. But if you know you're going to speak, go ahead and raise your hand now, and I will work down the list and call on all those blue hands. So Colson Whitehead, we have actually read The Underground Railroad by him before, which was another great book by him. The Nickel Boys, though, is his 2019 novel, and it was based on the real story of the Dozier School, a reform school in Florida that was exposed by an investigation. This book was named one of Time's best books of the decade, and it is his follow-up to The Underground Railroad. Now, both of those books won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. So I've seen, and I've actually done an event with Colson Whitehead before. He's quite a fascinating speaker, quite a wealth of knowledge and very interesting topics. I love that he wanted to talk about the X-Men and comic books when he was in town at the Fitzgerald Theater. It was so fun. And so he's a really interesting guy. He was born in 1969. He graduated from Harvard. He's been writing books for quite some time. I remember back when Books and Bars started 16 years ago. He was one of our early ones that we had considered reading. And I don't think we actually ended up reading his books for our club until Underground Railroad. And so now I'm glad that we can read another one by him so quickly. So what I'm interested in, though, is really what you guys thought of it to kick it off tonight. I have tons of topics and questions to discuss, but you guys read it. Hopefully you formulated an opinion or you have some questions, and usually the thing that you're thinking about, someone else is too. So is there anybody who recently finished the book, maybe in the last day or two, and has a really fresh take on it they want to share with us? Or open with maybe what you give it on Goodreads or anything on it. Do we have any hands tonight? I don't see any hands yet, so I will keep going until we have some. I guess one of the questions that I would ask, first of all, is, like I said, what did you think of it? You know, it's a pretty serious book, right? And it's interesting the way that he tackles this topic. And so I see Rebecca's hand is up now, but if you're thinking about what you want to say next, just think in terms of how he handled this subject matter, and if you appreciate his writing style around that. So Rebecca, are you ready to speak to us? I'm unmuting you.
Yes, I'm ready to speak, and good evening. In fall, I guess, all of a sudden. It kind of suits my mood, and it kind of suits this book because I know, and I kind of look like a ghostly thing too. I'm not very well lit. Anyway, this book made me sad, and the twist at the end just confirmed that it is a very, very sad story. And you know, the authors often use that perspective of talking, you know, from the future around the back, and you have some hope. This one, of course, took that away. Sorry, spoilers if anyone doesn't know. I won't get more specific with that. It was a lovely book. I think the characters were well developed, and you know, anyone living through that kind of life has to, I don't know, find a way to make it relatable to readers. And I think Colson did a very good job with that. I could imagine myself living there. And that is something that is a great feat, because obviously I would never have been threatened with that. But anyway, so I guess sadness and respect, and glad that it was something that came before me in this year especially. And so I appreciate Books and Bars for that.
Thanks, Rebecca. Appreciate you. And I think you have really cool lighting. I think it's a good look, and it may be fall this week, but I think we'll get a little bit of summer before fall actually starts. But thank you for your comments. I see Andrew has his hand up. Andrew, I'm unmuting you. Could you speak to us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
First, I'd like to say that the co-host is doing a magnificent job. She's the best one so far. So I really enjoyed this book. I didn't quite enjoy it as much as the Underground Railroad. I felt like the characters were a little underdeveloped in comparison. It was a very short, quick book. But as I thought about it, I thought that the one of the things about the way that the main character Elwood was kind of underdeveloped had a little bit of a theme towards what he was trying to say in this case, which is a lot of these stories have been lost and are gone with history. And Elwood was this kind of classic, person that we would love to see as the protagonist, where he is interested in the civil rights movement, is upwardly mobile, wants to make the world a better place. His ideals are in the right place, and he's kind of surrounded by a world that doesn't support that very well. Whether it's his grandmother who's cynical and just wants to keep him protected, or it's his good friend Turner who's very cynical about what's going to happen with all of this. And he does, in fact, do the things we want a protagonist to do. He informs on the institution. He stays true to his ideals, but he ends up dead in a ditch. And it's Turner, the cynical friend, who reluctantly supports him in the end, that ends up carrying on his legacy. To eventually having dinner in that hotel where he was, dreaming of one day seeing Black people being able to participate the same way that everyone else did in that activity. So I thought actually the way that he presented it was quite spectacular from the standpoint of, there was, there's all of these, there are so many of these stories that occurred during that time, prior to that time, that we don't know about. Heroes that should have gotten their just due by all of the cosmic justice in the world, but instead, ended up being shunted aside and not able to participate in their dreams. And I think that's a real strong message about the legacy of, why now? Why is it important that we have justice now and not, 40 or 50 or 60 years in the future? Because Elwood died in a ditch, and wasn't able to, his contribution was never able to be felt by himself. Anyway, I thought it was a really good book. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I do think in comparison to Underground Railroad, it is certainly a much shorter work. So in some ways, we maybe don't get to go as deep or find out as much or spend as much time with the characters. And then I also wonder if does the reveal, does the change, does that matter to you? Do you feel as though in some way you didn't know or you didn't like who you thought you were liking? I mean, does that shift how you felt about it in the end? And you don't have to answer this, Andrew, but it's just something that I'm wondering about when you talk about maybe we didn't get to know these characters quite as well, or didn't.
I was surprised. I was authentically surprised when the twist came at the end. So that was well done from a literary standpoint. He was, that was a surprise, and I think a good one from a storytelling standpoint. I'd be happy to hear anyone else's view on that. But I thought it was, I was totally expecting Elwood to be the one that is vindicated in the end, the cynical Turner, not, the one that's dying in the ditch, not the other way around. And I think the reality is that's not always how it happens. And that's a hard lesson for us all to have to learn.
All right, thank you. Maura McGarry, are you ready to speak? I see you have your hand up. May I unmute you? Could you talk to us, Maura?
Hi, it's been a while.
Hi, welcome back.
I'll do the icebreaker question real quick because I was very
Sure.
I'm a huge Gaiman fan, so I would love to have somebody else read Sandman with me instead of just giving it to everybody and telling them to read it. So my vote's for Sandman. Yeah, but
you don't have to twist. You don't have to twist my arm to read more Neil Gaiman. In fact, people are probably trying to stop me from getting to more Neil Gaiman. That said, I am trying to hold that one and time it for just before the release of the Sandman on the Netflix series. I like to have a tie-in sort of. So when we get word that that's coming out, maybe that's when Sandman will appear in our dreams or nightmares.
One more reason to read it
Yep.
again. Yeah, I kind of wanted second and third everyone's sentiment. I thought I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was excellently done, and it really impacted me. More so than the Underground Railroad did, and maybe this is just my brain. Until we had this discussion, I did not realize Underground Railroad included time travel, and so I feel that I didn't get the same kind of connection with that story that I did with this story. That being said, I think that Whitehead thrives in world building and not so much character development. I think that's just not his style. And which is why it wasn't like a total 5-star for me. There are a couple of things that I found especially interesting about it. I liked the way that he kind of wove in modern pop culture into the story, because reading it without any time context, I would have defaulted to this as like very like soon after Civil War, or and to have like references from the 60s and 70s woven into it, not that long ago, in the context of things, and just the atrocities that happened there. It made it especially powerful for me. And then my kind of final thought is like towards the end, with the twist of it actually being Turner, is that it also like struck home to me, just like the histories and the secrets that we all carry, like all of our own experiences, and we can make a lot of assumptions. Like that's what it hit home, is we can make assumptions about what someone's been through, if they're deserving, not deserving, et cetera, et cetera. But like having it turn out to be someone who, you know, maybe I liked them both equally. As a cynic myself, I was like, yeah, Turner's got it figured out. But yeah, I just felt like it really hits home as to like, we don't know the histories and the traumas and the stories that people are carrying unless they choose to share them with us. And so to kind of like take that with us as we interact with others, and maybe place judgment on them.
Thanks, and welcome back. Good to hear from you. And I appreciate your thoughts and comments on this. And I'm sure it's sparked a few more. We have a few more hands up here. So Maggie, I see your hand is up. Could I unmute you and talk to us, Maggie?
I can't hear Maggie.
Okay, thanks. I couldn't either, Lisa. I was just checking with you. Maggie, we weren't able to hear you. Are you still with us, Maggie?
We can see you and you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Microphone off?
Maggie, we'll hold your space and come back to you as soon as I see you again and ready with a hand up. I see Ellen has her hand up. Ellen Ogman, are you ready to speak to us?
I am. I read the book several months ago for a book group, and after I got my copy of it from the library and read the flyleaf, I hadn't known anything about the book. I thought, I don't want to read this. This is going to give me nightmares. It's going to be too painful. I thought it was one of the most amazing books I'd ever read. I thought Whitehead created this world and brought us into it in a way like somebody else had said, like I could picture myself there. It wasn't foreign, even though of course it was totally foreign. But I have a question that I'm hoping others in the group can answer. That ending, the twist in identity at the ending took me totally by surprise. I did not see it coming at all. And I'm wondering if I just missed the foreshadowing. Did he give hints? Did Whitehead give hints along the way that this was going to happen and I just missed it completely? That's really what I want to say. It's really a question. I don't have an answer. I didn't see anything.
Ellen, thanks for bringing it up. I'm sure a lot of us feel in the same boat. I'm off the top of my head, I can't think of it. I know that it was a shocker to both my wife and I as we were listening to the audio at the time. We kind of like looked at each other like, oh, what? So if there were hints or clues, we also missed them. I would love to hear from anyone that caught any foreshadowing or clues about it and could share that with us.
Or maybe if there's anyone in the group who read the book twice. And because I'm thinking I could go back, read the book again specifically to look for that, but I didn't see anything.
Yeah, it was quite a little trick, and it would be interesting to find out. I'd love to hear from if anyone caught anything, and especially have reading it a second time. Please raise your hand. But I do see Majel's hand is up. Majel, may I unmute you? Could you talk to us, Majel?
Hey, just got back from my walk. Love starting books and bars on my walk. It was great. To Ellen's point, actually, I was going to comment on something like this because to me, this book just total 5 out of 5. To me, it just completely deserved of the Pulitzer because not only obviously the story is just so compelling and just pulls you in as a reader, the writing is masterful. Like I remember from the prologue, you know, there's one of those paragraphs in the prologue where Whitehead writes, there's a man in New York named oh wait, is his name Elmond Curtis? Can you remind me? Elwood. Yep. There's a man in New York named Elwood Curtis who is reading this and has stayed away. And he knows about the White House boys and he knows about the social groups, but why would a bunch of men want to stand around talk about old shit that happened, share the Kleenex? There was like this cynical voice. And I noticed that in comparison, obviously, to Elwood's childhood voice, who said like the greatest gift that he got was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s on Mount Zion, or I'm not remembering the album exactly correctly. And I respectfully disagree with some of the previous commentators about that maybe the characters weren't developed as much. That's where I disagree because I heard the voice so clearly. The cynical voice that traced Turner, obviously much older and in New York, that voice was so cynical. And then when he's a mover, I was like, gosh, Elwood, like, I guess this experience really derailed you. Wow, a mover. I thought you were gonna, I don't know, be a civil rights activist. You were gonna be Ibram Kendi. You're gonna be Angela Davis, you know. And then he wasn't, obviously. He was a mover. And so like who he was as an adult, I was totally taken as this is what this school did to you. It totally stripped you of all this like optimism that you had. And like, I just really heard Elwood's voice so clearly as a kid. And I thought his character was so developed in terms of his thoughts about the marches and his eagerness, even him like hitchhiking early because he wants to get to college early just to walk around and just breathe in that college life. Like I was like, oh, I totally am with this character. I'm totally with him. And so the writing was just masterful. Both the tone of the characters, like their different perspectives, and the way that he would select the dialogue to give us. Like I noticed Whitehead would summarize some dialogue sometimes, and then like one of the boys would say something, and it was like the snippet end of a conversation or something, and it felt just like a punch to the gut, either because Whitehead like chose to use the N word in a specific place, or he chose to talk about, well, someone's getting taken out for ice cream, or like just like these phrases that would just like, or you're gonna get taken to Lover's Lane. They would just like hit me so deep in my gut, like it was just like a punch. And And it would come in these little short snippets of dialogue that after he'd summarize what the boys were doing, and then he'd like, boom, punch you with just something awful, hearing something awful come out of a young boy's mouth. And like, so just Pulitzer deserving, 5 out of 5, just loved it and really impacted me.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Majel, and thanks for taking us on a walk with you and then stopping to speak with us. I appreciate it. I'm glad it affected you so much, and I'm glad that you share a flip side of that about how these characters did get to you in a slim volume for some. I see Tom Zellman has his hand up. Tom, I'm unmuting you. Could you speak to us, Tom?
Yeah, am I coming through okay?
Yes, I
Okay.
hear you.
Well, like Ellen, like Andrew, I was really taken unawares by the ending of the book. The twist was disorienting and confusing at first, and gradually I was piecing it together. I think, Jeff, you asked about whether foreshadowings, and maybe not directly, but starting with the dishwashing competition at the beginning and the fake encyclopedia, at each step, it seems like Elwood is, you know, he thinks he belongs in a meritocracy, and that's the way the world is going to work. And that, but time and again, he's disappointed by it, and things just don't add up in that way. And I think the way that the author constructs the book, there are these disorientations along the way, like the encyclopedia one, or like the traffic stop where he's hitchhiking, he's on his way for the first day of college, and gets a hitch, and he gets pulled over, and end of story. Next one begins first day at the youth reformatory. The youth reformatory is theoretically, at least the rhetoric is, it's supposed to prepare bad kids for another chance. You know, they make the usual noises about justice and reform and rehabilitation, but in fact, it's every bit as unfathomable and arbitrary and random as any kind of a Kafka scenario. You know, people get punished, people get victimized, and there doesn't seem to be a great deal of rhyme or reason. I read the Griff story when it came out in New Yorker, and I was kind of waiting for that. And that one too seems to be, you know, what do they want from Griff? Does he go down because he can't count to 3? You know, so when we see him in later life, as people have said, Elwood is really cynical and angry, and things just don't add up. And he's accepted that about life. He's self-made man, but it certainly is a world where things just don't add up, and there's disorientation along the way. So you get to the end of the book, and holy smokes, it's Turner. Turner's the one who's made this all happen. And Elwood is gone from the book.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's quite a shift. Did that change any of the way that, I mean, you said it was a bit disorientating at first, and then you sort of, you know, figured it out, and maybe there's a little bit of, you said some things that you can look back at on it. Did that detract from the enjoyment of it or from the power of it? I mean, I feel like, I mean, for me, it didn't, in the sense that, you know, these are both two people that went through it. It's just sad to think maybe that, you know, the person that you've been following for this long was actually lost to us so long ago, you know, and that part is, you know,
yeah,
is sad. But
for me, it built the book up more. It gave me more to think about. And I guess at the beginning of the book, I'm naive like Elwood. And I believe that through hard work and intelligence, he's going to make a success of himself. And that's what he expects the world to be. But, and that's what I'm hoping for. But the novel thwarts me at every turn, you know, that's just not the way the world works. And I guess by the end of the book, or before the end of the book, I'm enough, oriented into the world of this novel that I don't have any expectations that the world's going to be any better than that.
Tom, I love that you were about to get thwarted by a black cat on your shoulder about to jump on you and join. But really added to your video, though. It's fun. I wish that we could all show more of our pets in books and bars. So
how my cat is also in Kara's frame.
I think it's great. I think as many pets as we could see up, and he's bored with the discussion. So there he goes. He read this one. He's moving on to his next book club. All right, Maggie is back. Maggie, I'm going to unmute you. I hope we can hear you this time. Talk to us, Maggie.
Let's see if this works. Am I there?
I hear you.
Yay. Yep. For Icebreaker, I would like to recommend that we read The Daughters of Erie-Town. It is a book written by Connie Schultz. It is not her first book, but it is her first novel. She's a longtime columnist for the Columbus, Ohio Post-Dispatch, and she teaches journalism at Kent State. She also happens to be married to Senator Sherrod Brown. One of her books is titled And His Lovely Wife. She has a lovely voice. She does a lot of commentary on television. Her Facebook feed is awesome. And she's written this novel about the white working class in semi-rural Ohio that are those swing voters that we, worry about in these elections. And this novel is about maybe how they got that way. I haven't read it yet. I pre-ordered it. It's sitting on my shelf waiting for me to have 3 days. So that's my plug.
Well, thanks, Maggie. It sounds really interesting. I'll definitely add it to our 2021 list, and everyone can see that on our bookshop.org page. I'll share the link again, and I'll add it to that list, and we can all talk about it, vote about it. But it sounds interesting. I'll check it out. Thank you.
Thanks. I loved this book, The Nickel Boys. It struck the sweet spot for me in that it was a novel that had me perfectly balanced between wanting to keep going and needing to stop and process. And so it was a push-pull. I need to keep reading this, but let me think about this for a bit. I thought it was brilliantly done. I agree with Majel that when I got to the chapter where the adult Elwood is in New York, I'm like, baby, what happened to you? This is not the same voice. What happened after the escape that we don't know about? So that when the reveal came, I was like, oh. But I enjoyed this much more than I did Underground Railroad. I thought Railroad had a lot of interesting concepts about the what ifs, but this was very real and very relatable and horrible and a wonderful read.
Thanks, Maggie. You bring up a great point, and it's something I've read, and I want to quote it here, that Colson Whitehead talked about why he didn't put anything fantastical or somewhat like magical realism like into Nickel Boys as opposed to how he has it in Underground Railroad. And if I can find the quote, I want to share why he did it that way. I might have to come back to it. I'm going to look for that, but I want to make sure that I get. And I'm probably going to pronounce the name wrong, but I see you have your blue hand up. My wife alerted me that your physical hand was up, but now you got your blue hand up. Jajiv, am I saying it right? Could you speak to us? I'm unmuting you. Are you with us?
Yeah, you got it.
Excellent.
Hi. I'm in agreement with everybody else. I think the book is really good, well written. It's a difficult book as well because of the contents. I mean, it is about violence and tragedy. And in terms of like, you guys were discussing about how you guys were surprised by the ending. There is like a small subtle hint toward the end of the book.
Tell us.
So Elwood, posing as Turner, he started his own moving company, Ace Moving, and he ends up running into another former nickel boy, and they end up in a restaurant or a bar, and they end up catching up. And toward the end of the discussion, the guy, not Elwood, the other nickel boy, mentions Turner, and Elwood, Turner posing as Elwood, was like, well, I don't know what happened to Turner. And and it was like, and we haven't like really heard about Turner up until that point, and it was just kind of strange to see Elwood not knowing the fate of Turner because they were so close up to that point. So I felt like there was something strange there, and there was going to be some eventual payoff.
Good catch there. Did you feel at any point that the other nickel boy didn't believe that he was Elwood, or thought something was fishy there, or was that not in what you got from it?
No, I don't think there was any suspicions
Okay.
as to like what the identity of Elwood was. It was just kind of like a slight, it was very much like throwaway. I feel like, oh, what happened to this guy? And we haven't heard from him in a while. So
Yeah.
And I think that was the author's way of kind of just quietly brushing over a certain detail so that you wouldn't be onto him, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a great catch on that detail there. Thanks for reminding us and sharing that. Did you have any other comment or question about
No,
at this point? No. Okay, great. Well, glad that you got a chance in here. Ginger Buckland, I'm unmuting you. Could you speak to us, Ginger?
Yeah. So I'm the odd one out here because I was totally expecting this not to be Elwood. I didn't know who it would be, but similar to Maggie and Majel, as soon as the New York narrative started, I thought, this isn't Elwood, right? This just isn't Elwood. And the thought that kept going through my head over and over was, who is this? Who is this? Because this isn't Elwood, so who is it? and it, that was kind of my primary thought process through that whole part of the book. And then in the back of my mind, I was kind of thinking the same thing, like, well, maybe something massive is going to happen that just breaks his spirit finally, and he becomes a different person. But with each interaction that he had, with his wife, with the guys in the bar, with the moving company interactions, I just, every time there was an interaction, I'm like, nope, this isn't Elwood. I don't know who this is, but it's not Elwood. And so for me, it was like the tension was different, right? Because I was trying to figure out who this was. And the end, finding out it was Turner, was like a relief to me. Like, oh, like this tension is now resolved because I know who this is. And the sadness of the arc of Elwood's life, like Turner would not have started his own company if not for the influence of Elwood. So there was this sort of beautiful, his spirit living on and having a positive impact through someone else's life just by who Elwood was. And so that really it struck me very differently than I think it would have had it been a surprise to me.
Well, excellent. Well, that's a really fun, different perspective that you had on it. And I'm glad that then you felt that relief. And it's almost like you were glad, at least that it was who it was, and that somewhat did you tell us what was the initial, how did you know from at what point?
The most notable thing is that that the author used just pronouns the vast majority of times that he didn't use normally. So in that whole New York part, he said he almost all the time. So it wasn't Elwood did this, Elwood did that. It was he stepped off the sidewalk, he went here, he went here. And then there's the reveal, like when he hands somebody the business card and the way it is written, you know, and the business card said, this is the name. And it's like, oh, well, clearly this isn't like I didn't know if it was somebody else's business card or he's using the name, but you don't use that literary device unless the person presenting it isn't the person listed on the card. So
Awesome.
but the pronouns was the big thing, because I kept thinking they were going to say it was somebody else. Like they kept saying
love it.
he, and I was like, who is it?
Ginger, are you an Agatha Christie fan? Did you read 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle with us? You sound like you'd be good at solving mysteries ahead of time. Like you'd figure it out.
I did not get through that one. I read like half of it, and then I ran out of time before book club, and then I didn't.
Okay.
Because I ran out of time.
Well, we got a great response from the mystery aspect, and it definitely made me want to read some more. So I have a few mysteries on our list for 2021, including a classic Agatha Christie. If anyone's interested and want to vote on those, please let me know, because I'm always looking for the next great mystery to solve. So thank you. Very cool. Kara Berger, you're with us. I'm unmuting you. Talk to us, please.
I was going to say I'm very much on the same level as Jajiv and Ginger. I feel like they covered a lot of what I was going to say. The other thing about this scene where not Elwood, but Turner posing as Elwood encounters the other former student is he has this moment where he thinks of giving him his business card, but then like decides not to. And he's like he's very like reserved and like holding a lot back. Like he's asking questions, but not answering. So that was the moment that I was like positive. But then like Ginger, from the very beginning, I was like, these aren't the same people. I remember I went back and I reread the first chapter because I was like, oh, like in the second, I was like, this is a different person. I thought this was going to be the same person. And I had to go back and then I was like, oh, it is the same person. But I kept on having like doubts. So when the reveal happened, like I didn't necessarily guess that it was Turner. Like I thought Turner was gonna die. But I guess like it made a lot of sense. Like when the reveal happened, it just really clicked for me. But as I was reading this, I guess I like really appreciated it. I feel like a lot of like books about like horrible boarding schools are like not necessarily centered in reality. So like terrible stuff will happen, but like you can distance yourself because it's like, it's, you know, not historical fiction. So for me, like the connection that I kept getting reminded of was like some of the memoirs and movies I've seen about residential schools, which, you know, is very different. And, you know, who was supposed to be there. Like in obviously this school, Nickel Academy, it was Black and white boys. And in residential schools, it was like all Native kids. But I just felt like the way that they like lied to the kids and were trying to really crush them down, and like just so many of the atrocities they were able to get away with, it felt very, very similar to a lot of the, I don't know, books I've read and things I've learned about residential schools in the United States and Canada.
Residential schools in US and Canada. Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind, I'm thinking of one of the first books that I remember liking a lot as a kid and that affected me. And did you ever read A Separate Peace by John Knowles? I think that's like something that's like was taught in schools. I don't know if it still is. Is that what you mean by a residential school in some way, like a boarding school? Is that?
Yeah, so like residential schools like were throughout the United States and Canada, and they were run by the government, and like Native kids were forced to go there, and it was a way to try and like, you know, destroy the culture. Like they would have their head shaved, they were beaten if they spoke indigenous languages. And like a lot of them lasted up until like the 1960s, but they started in the 1800s. And so it was a way to like not like a quote would be like, you know, kill the Native person to save the man. I don't know, like I think that was like a quote, not just about residential schools, but about like the US philosophy of how to deal with American Indian people.
Okay.
Yeah, so like Native kids were torn from their families and like forced to go to residential schools. So like they didn't, you know, not that like Elwood or Turner or any of these boys really committed like serious crimes that deserved to be sent there. But like the kids that were sent to residential schools were just like taken from their families. Like they didn't have to like commit a crime or whatever to be taken away.
Well, I mean, Elwood basically was hitchhiking at worst. I mean, he was just getting a ride. It is unbelievable. I mean,
Yeah.
it's believable, but it's so sad that's and how quickly that happened. And then his life is this, and it changed from that. And I was shocked in the reading of it, of how it was just like, and then this, and this is it now. This is where I live. My life has completely changed because I got into this car, you know, and that's it. That
Yeah.
was, yeah.
I feel
was
like
a
that's
shock.
sort
That was
of
bad.
like those like little like I don't know. It's a huge injustice. But I feel like in a lot of Colton Whitehead's books, he like really captures like these really mundane things that are so unfair. And it's just infuriating. And every part of me is waiting for the end of the book when people will finally get justice, and it like never happens. It's just, I don't know.
No.
It's really, it makes his stuff really hard to read, but you know.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, and just in case you don't know, the cat from Tom's video is behind you, so just watch out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think his cat had more white in it.
Yeah,
Your
my cat is
seems,
all black.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
I love the idea of if everyone I call on has a black cat behind them. It's just like the cat is moving from hand to hand, which would be great. Allison, I'm about to call on you. I'm going to unmute you, Allison. When I see you, please let there be a black cat behind you. Allison? Allison?
I could find a gray cat. I have one of those.
Okay.
They
Good enough.
usually walk in front of the screen, but they're not with me. They might, as soon as I start talking, they might appear now though. And they're not sitting behind me because usually I have this box that they like to sit on too. This was a hard read because it very much felt like I read a lot of nonfiction memoirs, and this felt so real. I know it's based off of real stories, but so it was really hard to read. And I almost felt like it was being written as a survivor story in some ways. I feel like that's why one of the narrators had to be, or like there had to be this twist at the end, because you know like he survives, and as you're listening, you want him to survive so badly, but you wonder how can he? And then at the twist at the end, I feel like that's when I could like let go of what I was holding on, worried about him, and just like grieve the loss of like that is really, you know, it doesn't always like someone survives, they make it through, like we are losing people. And I felt like it's very, very real considering all that's going on in our world today. And just thinking of George Floyd and, you know, how like that's in their own city, you know. And so that all just felt very connected and very current about what's going on. I really liked how he weaved MLK into the story, because I feel like it's interesting because like growing up, you know, I was never taught a lot about Malcolm X. It was always just Martin Luther King Jr., nonviolent. That's how we fix things, and it's almost like a misportrayal of him too. I like that like that was his hero, and that's what he believed in, and he followed his way of being by like believing in the system and believing that the people that were holding him captive, if he told them the truth, that they'd do something about it. And then he ended up dying for it. So just like it was hard to read, but I think it's important to read these stories because, I mean, the criminal justice system, the juvenile justice system right now is not effective in helping our children, and we're imprisoning way too many people. So the book spoke to me in all those different ways, and I was very connected to the characters. So I appreciated, even though it was a hard read, I appreciated reading it. So my thoughts. I hope I
Thanks,
came
Allison.
through this time. I know that my internet connection cuts out sometimes.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, at first the connection was a little choppier. Your video seems to be frozen, but your audio got better once the video froze. So I got a lot of what you said, and you had some great points, and I want to highlight a couple things. One of the things that I heard you say that I feel is how current this felt, and I feel like there's so many things that unfortunately for me maybe being behind on what's really been going on, and it's my white privilege, but there's just things that I've been reading, seeing that I'm like, wow, like this feels like it could have been written or made, you know, like just this summer. This feels like reactionary, but no, it's because these things have been going on for so long and they haven't been addressed, and that's just really sad. And another point that you bring up is interesting is the weaving in of the speeches and like what MLK's words are. And if anyone, it's on my list for a possible read, but there is the Lovecraft Country show right now on HBO. They're doing something really interesting with taking a story that's set in mid-50s, but they are weaving in speeches from different times and current music and kind of addressing issues with race. It's a whole stew of things going on there. It's pretty wild, and I don't know if the show is completely working on all levels, but it's definitely worth a watch, and it makes me want to read the book. The way that they combine sort of, you know, these famous speeches and then apply it to things that you wouldn't necessarily right away think about. But yeah, I mean, it did feel so current. And I know this book's only a few years old, and they're talking about a real life school. You know, this is a fictionalized version of it, but it's really sad that these things are still going on, and that's why these things feel current. Nothing has changed, and we got to make a change. So thank you for sticking with us, and I believe you that you have a dark gray cat that's almost black, and I'm going to see if Pam Gardo also has a cat behind her. I'm going to unmute. Pam, are you ready to talk to us about your cat or anything about the book? Hi, Pam. Talk to us.
Sadly, I have no animals with me today.
That's okay. I'm kidding.
But I did want to talk about the social justice themes because I thought they were so relevant, and I'm glad a couple other people, picked up on that too. But one of the things that I really appreciated was that the whole issue of the school took me back in time to the Indian boarding schools. I grew up in northern Wisconsin, right between two Indian reservations, and I know that even though we were long past the Indian boarding school period, there still continues to be a lot of racism and stereotypes. And, as a child, I was very aware that my, Native friends were often treated differently and expectations were different for them. And so we can look back, and even William Kent Krieger's newest book, This Tender Land, covered a situation with Indian boarding schools and kids that had to escape the terrible circumstances. Some of those schools weren't government run, they were actually run by Christian entities. And so a lot of them were kind of church boarding schools. And then in the future, we don't have to look that far to see those same kinds of situations, not just with what's been in the news lately with, the police shootings of unarmed Black people, but we have other juvenile detention centers. And there was one in Wisconsin that they've been trying to close because of the abuse that's gone on there, but they have nowhere else to put some of the kids, and it's largely African-American population. And I think that continues, not just in prisons, but, with kids in detention centers, in residential detention centers. And so I think we can look at the threads of connection for social justice and injustice in a lot of different ways from this book.
Absolutely right. And thanks for bringing it up. And shout out to my old home, Wisconsin. Although I've been a little worried about them lately, the things I'm reading, and I don't know. I guess I'm glad I'm in Minnesota. But I wanna help Wisconsin. And are you in Minnesota right now, or are you in Wisconsin?
I'm in Wisconsin.
Okay. Well, how are things there?
Cold, very cold.
Didn't
get out of the
feels like
40s
fall here
today.
too. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, hey, the Brewers won 19-0 though today. They beat Detroit, so that's something. All right.
Room for hope.
Well, there you go. There's something. I see Rachel G has her hand up. Rachel, I'm unmuting you. Can you speak to us?
Yeah, my tabby cat left, but I have a sleeping black dog, if that helps. I don't know.
Nice.
Not a black cat, but that's like
your dog right now is like, I can't believe I had to pose as a cat for your book club.
For this, but okay. I kind of wanted to say something about like based on that Kara brought up, and then someone at the beginning. I'm terrible with names. I'm sorry I brought this up too, but like it was so short. But I thought that every time there was terrible things that they dwelled on, but there was a lot of terrible things that they didn't dwell on that were just the state of life. And it hit me like so hard every time, where they just would like, oh yeah, that, or it'd just be something offhand or implied, and they'd keep moving on. And I was just like, that's a horrible thing. How could you just glance over that? And it was just something that struck me about the book so much. And at first I was thinking like, yeah, this is very short. I would have liked to spend more time with the characters, of course, but it was just kind of like, maybe I should have slowed down reading it a little bit, because it was the immenseness of the horribleness was throughout. And like the fact that maybe a longer book would have dwelt a little bit more on all of these, but the fact that it wasn't dwelt on also gives me the impression of, this is just the state of life, and I have to accept this because there's nothing else I can do about it, because they just have to just brush that stuff off. And I thought that was also a powerful way to do it. Maybe, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I just thought that fact that like so much wasn't dwelt on, but it was as horrible as the things that were dwelt on. And then I think you brought up the card too, and I thought that it was a really, really planned out well, or just good writing about how the fact that when he wasn't going to give the card to the friend who was clearly on drugs or something like that, and he was dwelling on, I wish my friend died. We didn't say who that friend was. My friend died, and this guy made it, and how awful that was. And they looked at the card, and I went back to read the card too, and I'm like, well, I think it's, he doesn't want to give him the card because he doesn't want to actually get bothered about a job or show the fact that it says president on his car on his card and rub that in or anything like that. So there were so many different ways you could take everything he was doing, which I thought was great, because when you go back, it's really because he doesn't want him to show that it says Elwood, because he knows that he's not Elwood. And he doesn't want to talk about his friend because he's the friend that he's that we think he's talking about and stuff. But and I think you guys said, oh, it's not Elwood at the beginning with the cynicism, but I think the whole novel kind of set me up for where I was actually believable to me that they had finally beaten Elwood's spirit so hard into submission. Whatever happened, whatever we were about to read about with Nickel, is that they had beat his spirit down enough that he was now this cynic. And my whole expectation was that Turner was going to die and Elwood was just going to give up and say, he was right. He was right the whole time, and I can't live positively anymore. And I thought that was the whole point of it. But Whitehead's just writing of it was, I think, perfect, because he did so many things that you could interpret it the way that he wants you to interpret it, But when you go back, and I wish I had time to go back, but I don't, was the real way, what's actually being said is it's Turner the whole time, but it's just, I thought it was so well written that way to like hide that fact, but make it seem so normal. And I was convinced that Elwood just became this big cynic because of everything that was going on. But yeah, I don't know. I thought that was great. The brushing off of horrible things, because people under oppression just have to brush off horrible things just to keep going. It's just all, it's great writing.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, you were going back and forth between, I was worried that this was too heavy and too hard, but you brought it home with the, that this is great writing, and that ultimately I think it's important that we do, mix things up and do read things that aren't always, easy or fun or light, but that are maybe a hard truth. And sometimes it's hard to get through. You're right. I mean, it's not necessarily a fun read or something, that makes you feel good, but I think it gives you that other perspective that's important that we might not have, and it's important for us to know these things and to and to help make a change. So thank you for that.
I'm sorry.
Of course,
one more thing. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just I realized once I hung up the book about that they
It's
told
like Fight
us
Club
on the cover of the book the ending.
That's
I'm like,
brilliant.
oh, I'm so dumb. But it's yeah. But it wasn't because they're dumb, because it's a good writer. That's why.
No, I saw that too, and that's brilliant. That's like some kind of Fight Club level stuff. I really liked it. My co-host has pointed out, because I couldn't see, that Jerry Wolfel has had a finger up for a while now, and I don't think he's giving me the middle finger. I think he's raising his hand. So Jerry, are you ready to speak, Jerry? I'm going to unmute you. Are you with us? Do you want to talk to us, Jerry? Jerry Wolfel.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. I wanted to agree with Rachel that I thought the book was really well balanced in terms of dealing with a horrible subject in a shorter version, so you didn't get so depressed reading it that they move on to some lighter things. I thought it was really well constructed that way. I enjoyed the book on many levels. I read it about 6 months ago, and I just signed on for this book club through the friends because I had read this book, so I didn't have to figure out how to get it done. I will show you pictures of the two cats that I live with. They're here in the room with me. Maybe you can see them. Otto and Princess Kate, for what that's worth. And I will also put in a pitch for Wisconsin. My wife and I have a lake cabin in northern Wisconsin. And there's a radio station that many of you might enjoy, that I enjoy immensely, that broadcasts from Reserve, Wisconsin, up near Hayward, WOJB, 88.9 on the dial. And they play, it's a nonprofit station. They play eclectic music, a number of some indigenous music and indigenous programming, but it's I just really enjoy it very, very much. So the point about the book that I wanted to make that hasn't been made yet, because so many of you have made wonderful points, is the I really appreciated the way the author characterized the institution and the guards. Remember the points about the one guard that was taking the kids out to do chores around town for the benefactors, and the way they'd have to dress up the institution when there was the annual visit from the funders or from the government and all of that. And that sounded so typical of government institutions, and to some extent nonprofits, that you have to look your best when the funders are there to inspect you. But the boxing matches, the fights there on the bets and the efforts at all that. I mean, I thought this book was really well constructed on many levels. I enjoyed it immensely, and I also agree that it has such an impact, such a significance for 2020, for today's events, for what's going on nationally after George Floyd and all that. So I just really enjoyed the book, and Jeff and all of you, I appreciate your comments, and thanks for moderating, Jeff.
Well, Jerry, thanks for joining us. I'm glad that something that you read a while back, resonated with you enough that when the friends offered it, that you joined us. So hopefully you can look ahead at what we're doing in the next few months and join us again, whether it's from your lake home in Wisconsin or wherever the pets are. And I think that you've gingered throughout the idea that maybe next time the icebreaker is we just open with introducing, seeing our pets. And I think that's great. So we should do that. But thanks again for joining us, Jerry. I'm glad we got you in tonight. I have a bunch more hands. Donna has not had a chance yet. So Donna Adams, are you with us? Can you talk to us?
Yes. All right. Just quickly, I need to read the book again now because I so appreciate the insights that I could have noticed earlier on and with the switcheroo at the end and so on. But about the writing, I know a couple of people have commented on his use of in the dialogue, just little references to Lover's Lane or the ice cream or whatever. And I think, or the White House. And I think that was a really wonderful way to avoid having to go in so much detail about the violence and the torture and so on. I think we knew enough about the punishments that were being doled out to these boys that we didn't, and when I knew this book was about a school where, boys even ended up dying and being buried behind the school. But so I was really worried that it was going to be overboard on the torture and the horrible, horrible punishments. And there's so much more going on in this book that I think we just learned enough about what those scenes would be, Lover's Lane and so on, that we just had those little references here and there that I think was a shortcut way of letting us know this was going to happen, but we moved on. And we could just, but not have to read it all. One other thing that struck a chord with me was, and somebody else mentioned this, is the weaving in of the MLK quotes, which I think it was a reminder about how powerful the words can be of people that can really rally others to see the world in a new way. I mean, there's a section, I think it's on about, I want to say, in the 30s, page 37 maybe, where he talks about participating then in a demonstration and how he felt closer to himself than he had ever felt, and that he was ready to take a position in the line of people working toward a better situation for Black Americans. And as I read that and read these other inspiring quotes, and I know it didn't turn out that way so much for him, but I really thought a lot about all the people that marched after George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I just felt hopeful. I thought, maybe this is the kind of feeling that people will have in these marches and in hearing the inspiring words of the people that spoke at the different assemblages in the streets and whatever, that there needs to be a way forward. And the more people can, as a group, give that sense of support and solidarity to one another, the more optimism there will be that things can actually change. And it's always kind of discouraging to see how this was, 50, 60 years ago that some of these things were, where we thought there was all this progress, and now we're still doing the same things again and trying to bring up the same inspiring messages. But I think that when he felt that was really coming into his own, I just hope that many, many people feel a greater sense of themselves and their future and what they can do to change the world by joining in on those kinds of experiences. And the last thing I'll say is just there's a wonderful series being repeated right now on PBS about the history of African Americans. And it's Henry Louis Gates Jr. is the host on it. And last night's was about, last night's episode is just before the Civil War. And he talks in there about the Underground Railroad and the slaves, trying to run away. And there's a part, and I know, Jeff, you had something in your comments on the chat about this, but when he talks about in the book the different ways there were of getting out, and one of them was, of course, to run away. And, it wasn't a very often, it was hardly ever successful, of course, but there's a line where he says, to forbid the thought of escape, even that slightest butterfly thought of escape would be to murder one's humanity. And that was Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s comment last night too, and with the Underground Railroad and the slaves trying to run away, is that there is something so basically human about needing to improve your situation. And if there's even the slightest hope, they have to take it. So all the bravery and the courage and the risk taking that went into these characters, and then even, back with the Underground Railroad, like in that book that we read, it just brings to mind one of the speeches, I think it was Obama during the Democratic Convention, that said, look, there is so much courage and bravery that people have exhibited in history to try to move forward in the area of social justice. We just need to do it. We can't let all that hard work go unrewarded. So anyway, again, just echoing some really resonating moments in the book to what we're doing right now. So yeah, I thought it was great.
Thanks, Donna. And I too feel at times hopeful and inspired. And then there's other times where I feel like, nothing changes, and every day there's something, worse that just is making it harder. But I think a lot of it has to do with just making sure that everybody gets out and votes and really makes their opinions known and the changes they want to see made, because if we don't, nothing's going to change. So I know that's not the only thing, but I feel like that's what's looming right now. And that's just a way that, if you're feeling that you want to make a change and things are a certain way, you got to get out and get people to vote and talk to people about what you want. But yeah, it's funny when you mentioned that you saw something on PBS. I forgot that PBS existed once Downton Abbey left. They're still doing stuff on PBS. I was all about it with Downton Abbey. I kid, but no, there's too many other things I'm watching right now. But thanks for reminding me that PBS is there, and I could watch it, and I should. I could probably watch it online. That would be great. But thank you for that. So the amount of things that I'm watching that aren't on PBS, though, it's just crazy. It's crazy. But thank you. Okay, so Evelyn has not had a chance yet. Evelyn, I'm unmuting you. Are you still with us?
Hi, I'm right here. Hi. I have to just say real quick, love hard books and bars. I really think I love having the discussions, makes for a better discussion. In terms of things I want us to read in 2021, Fleischman is in Trouble. I just finished.
Oh yeah.
It is fantastic, enjoyable, hard. It's got a twist. There's a lot to talk about. And the author definitely has a good sense of humor too. I laughed out loud several times. So yes, this book, I thought the writing was excellent. I loved how Colson Whitehead crammed so much in just a few words or a few sentences. Just for example, when adult Elwood walks into that restaurant and the host doesn't quite recognize him right away or say anything to him right away, and his immediate thought is racist or rude, and that his entire life is thinking that. That's just how a Black person thinks. That's the sort of intimation there, which I thought was really enlightening. I want to second what Rachel said about how everything, there were the bad things, and then everything was, it was just wonderful how realistic it was, where the boys were just boys. They would play and, like, you know, trade baseball cards and fight over ping pong and just like things any boys would do, but they had this horrible setting and this horrible threat above them at all times. And then I also wanted to give a little shout out to the little part of about the New York City Marathon and just the description of who you likes to watch and the cheering on the people. And I really loved the passage where it talks about how the day before you could have been fighting with them in line at the bodega, and we're all together and like we're cheering just for this endurance race and for everyone that's on it. I thought that was fantastic. That's all.
And that will always remind me of the Seinfeld episode when they cheering and they say, "You're all winners," out the window. If you've ever seen it, it's a good one.
I'm working
I will
through
add
Seinfeld.
Fleischman.
I'm halfway through season 4.
Excellent. I will add Fleischman and Trouble back on the list. I had that on the list a while ago, and I think the list was stricter. It was tougher back when we were meeting in person, and I felt like everything had to be a paperback. And I just couldn't do, like, I feel like some of the restrictions have been lifted, and it's easier for me to just throw out ideas. And like I said, if you don't want to do that one, in 2 weeks there'll be another one. But I wanted to do Fleischman is in Trouble, so I will put that one back on the list. So thank you for that. And yeah, and you're all winners. I was being told that there was a giant black cat behind Rebecca Moss. Rebecca, is this true? If I go to you now, will I see a giant black cat?
You will. This is my actual cat, but not currently sitting over my shoulder. I've used it as I have fun with backgrounds. You got to have fun with Zoom, you know? So what are you going to do? So when you were talking about the cat, I just had to bring this one up. So yeah, I guess my comment is we are creating new stories as we speak. I'm thinking specifically about the border, where all of the kids are in encampments and being ripped away from their parents, and the misery and the injustice and the recreation of all of this stuff is happening. And somewhere in the future, there will be another Colson Whitehead who has to tell these stories. And some of these boys and girls will be the ones who suffer through. And it infuriates me that we are doomed to repeat it. And I sometimes I take the very high level cynical view that this is just the human condition, that our competition for resources and I don't know, our narrowness of our ability to accept everyone creates these tensions. And then other times I can't help but identify that with all of the horribleness and so many of the words that I've been writing down, violence and justice, create beauty and grace and courage and bravery. And I hate to think that the two are inextricably combined, but I think that that might be part of the equation. And my only hope is that those who have to pay the cost are given some kind of reparation for it. And so those were my very philosophical thoughts as a result of this book and as a result of this discussion. And we need to hear these stories over and over again, no matter how hard they are. And it makes us better able to maybe occasionally win the fight.
Thanks, Rebecca. And thank you for not disappointing when I was told that there was a giant black cat. There really is, and it's yours, and I love it. And I used to play with backgrounds, but the last time I did, I had a massive technical difficulty, and then I've been afraid to do it ever since. So I don't do it anymore myself. But I had all these fun ones I downloaded and everything, and I would love to have a giant Cosmo dog behind me. But I, at the expense of this discussion, no, I will not do that. So thankfully, as far as I understand, we have not had any technical difficulties tonight. I see Kara and Morris hands are up, so I want to make sure that I get to them. So Kara Berger, talk to us again. You're with us. Will the cat be with you?
My cat left. She got
They
bored
get
with the
bored. You know what?
discussion.
They get bored. Yeah, they
Yeah.
don't usually finish the book, and
Yeah.
then they're like, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, and I think she might have been jealous of the other cats. They were getting a lot of attention. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I feel like I just wanted to reflect on some of the things, and I don't remember everyone who said it, but just talking about kind of how Whitehead portrays like a lot of the really evil and horrible things that happen. Like it doesn't seem like he really focuses in on it. And I kind of like had that feeling, and I had the same feeling with Underground Railroad and some of his other works. But I don't think it's because he like, I don't know, doesn't focus on it as much. I think it's because he doesn't really, for lack of a better word, like look at it in like a cinematic way. Like if this was made into a movie, there'd be no swelling music. It wouldn't be a thing to gaze upon in horror. I'm reminded of the Ursula Le Guin quote about the banality of evil and the boredom of evil. Because I think like, you know, going to back what Rebecca said with the situation at the border, you know, if you walked there, it would be, or if you like walked through it, it would be a bunch of people doing their jobs, and their jobs are evil. And there would be a lot of suffering, but there would be a lot of systems. And it's not, you know, like in the movie 12 Years a Slave where something really bad is happening and like the camera focuses in on it. Like it's just, it happens all the time. Like people are like used to it. So terrible things would happen, but like they don't zero in on it. And so I think that's like I don't know, like it's intentional on his part, how he portrays it. And then I find that like the two moments that one is more of a moment in Underground Railroad than in this one, but I still like could feel this moment viscerally, and it made me feel so sad. As like I think some of the real tragedies, it focuses less on, you know, some of the physical like torture that people go through and like murder, but on the relationships that suffer. Like the fact that Elwood just disappears basically from his old life, and his grandmother, you know, just never hears from him again and never finds out like what happened to him. And, you know, she's left with the feeling that like, you know, she failed him because she tried to get him a lawyer, and the lawyer like scammed her and ran away with her money. And I think like that human tragedy is what really makes me sick with his books. And the same thing was with Underground Railroad, and the fact that Cora went away like hating her mother for leaving her behind, and one of the last things we see is that her mother like died the night she ran away, and she was going to go back to her. And like yeah, they just they really punch me to the gut more than a lot of even like the descriptions of physical violence that happen.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to the hard books and bars thing. But you've read. It sounds like have you read more than the two main ones that we're talking about here by Colson
I read
Whitehead?
some of his earlier stuff, and I need to like go back and relook at titles. I'm like really bad at remembering like the names of authors and titles. So I know it's obviously
I can tell. There was
Yeah.
a John Henry Days,
Mm-hmm.
The Colossus of New York, Apex Hides the Hurt, Sag Harbor. Sag Harbor and Apex Hides the Hurt were, I think, slight departures. They were a little different, not as, I mean, like Sag Harbor is kind of like, it's like a wistful look back at like mid 80s, like growing up in the
John
80s
Henry
on like the
one.
East Coast.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to say I read another, but this was like in college, so it's a while ago for me.
All right. Well,
They're good. He's
thank
a
you.
really
More,
good writer. So if you
he
want to look
is.
at his other stuff, I haven't read all of it, so I can't recommend all of it, but I'm sure it'd be good.
Yeah, no, he is. And I used to, another thing I used to do is not repeat authors as much. But at a certain point, if someone's going to win the Pulitzer Prize 2 times in a row and is going to be this relevant and this interesting, this good, I'm not going to deny, it's okay that we already read this author. And I've repeated that a few times. And you know what? Maybe we'll read Colson Whitehead as much as we read Neil Gaiman at some point. Who knows? But Maura has her hand up. Speaking of Neil Gaiman, Maura, are you still with us?
Yes. I don't have a cat. I have a 12-year-old dog who hates cameras, so she will literally run away if I move the laptop towards her. But I kind of wanted to build off what Rebecca and Cara were saying as a big takeaway for me from this book, especially as a white person, and I am a white person in helping professions, is like recognizing trauma responses, and the trauma responses, and also recognizing like the kind of non-trauma responses or privilege responses that are built into my own experiences. Something that stuck with me is when he was talking about the school kind of being built on the foundation of slavery, and he said something along the lines of, like, as long as the sons of the sons of the sons remember how they're supposed to feel about us, they're going to keep treating us this way. And that's something, like, as a white person reading this and looking at, like, and kind of thinking about, like, what it meant for me viscerally as a white person for Elwood to not be Elwood, and kind of like the differences and maybe even the value I placed on those two characters, is respecting the trauma story of Turner, and the trauma story of the other boys that we don't hear about, right? The boys that are like Chicky Pete, who could have been a great musician and instead ended up addicted to heroin, and looking at like how do we, like, and how kind of getting to Rebecca's point, the banality of evil, that by ignoring that or not recognizing that and being part of the healing process, how we may be like continuing to propagate these stories.
Thanks, Maura. I see a couple questions in the chat that while I have everyone here, we should throw out and see if anyone wants to raise their hand and address. Does anyone remember the boy behind the curtain in the medical ward? Was that resolved? And also, do we ever know exactly what Earl did to Jamie? Anyone have any thoughts on those things? Any answers? I see Maggie has her hand up, whether it's about that or not. Maggie, I'm unmuting you. Talk to us.
I think the boy behind the curtain was a foreshadow of people disappearing, because he just wasn't there after a couple of days. Because Elwood was in the infirmary for quite some time recovering from his injury, and he never heard anybody over there. He was aware of the nurse going in and out, and then never saw anybody, and then he was gone.
Okay.
So I just think that was Whitehead's way of letting us know that people disappear here.
Yep. Does anyone have any thoughts on, do we know what Earl did to Jamie? Any thoughts on that? Anyone want to hazard a guess or address that? If not, I also wonder, what are we taking away from this then? I think it might be sort of, I don't want to say obvious, but obviously Colson Whitehead is saying something here, and but what are we getting from it? What's our takeaway here? Any thoughts on that? Anyone? Majel has her hand up. Majel, talk to us.
Hello. I'm really struggling with that question, Jeff. And I've been thinking about it actually all night and going back on it with what everybody has been commenting, because I think maybe it was like an Atlantic review of the book, like the short synopsis said a story of horror, brotherhood, and redemption or something like that. And I went, oh, okay, so this book is going to have like justice in the end, or like, oh, this book is going to have like something good is going to happen to these characters. And I feel just really conflicted about what maybe the main takeaway is, because I could see a lot of different angles from this. I could see the power, you know, how powerful it was for us to know Turner's first name, Jack, for example. Like, I think that's a really important part of giving him personhood and humanity, which I think something that I've picked up as a white person in the national discourse that a lot of Black Americans feel they're denied is their personhood and the respect of their body. And so like just even hearing Jack's name, like, oh my gosh, like you're not just a boy who was abused in a home, like you have a name, you're a whole person. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe that's the redemption. Or like the fact that he tried to live up to Elwood, is that redemption? I just really didn't understand why that art. Anyways, I'm perseverating on that for a second, only for the point of I was hoping to try to find, is this telling us something hopeful? Is it like that? Is it that Dr. King quote of like the universe is the arm of the universe is long and it bends towards justice, because eventually the school was closed down? But what does it mean for the really hopeful person to be just gunned down in a field and buried? What does that mean for people who stand up to injustice, and that his letter didn't matter? Was Whitehead trying to tell us that there is some futility in rising up? So I feel really conflicted about that, because I see the back and forth about what the final message is for the book.
Yeah, I guess I took the idea of justice, trending, but it takes a long time, and this idea that it's taken this long, but brick by brick there's a dismantling, and it's worth it ultimately, even if the payoff or the justice isn't served until this much longer. And that by doing this, then at least hopefully these things aren't repeated, and we learn, even if it's taken this long, that it's still worth it, that it's still better than than not saying something, than not doing something about it. But it is tough to, with the fact that then you find out that the protagonist you think you're following actually is dead. And so why did he do that exactly? Why did he write it that way? And what's the point there? I'm interested in anyone else's thoughts on this too. I see Maura has her hand up. Maura, I'm unmuting you.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I've been reconciling with like, well, how do we just not get sad about like everything we're hearing? And it spoke to me. So I'm like, I just finished White Fragility like around the same time, and so a lot of the themes, a lot of how I was interpreting and kind of internalizing my own relation to Nickel Boys was built off of that. And this idea of, I think it is very important that in most of these own Black voices stories that we read, it is that people try, and like the takeaway is that maybe something small will happen, but ultimately the power lies in the white people, right? Like we are the ones that have the power to like change the system, because we're the one controlling the racial system right now. We can grant like, and she brings this up in White Fragility, is that people of color can tell us as much, like they can tell their stories, and that will only be able to get them so far because we've withheld power from them as white people. And so taking those stories and using them to say, like, this is where, like, Jeff made a great point of voting, or like using it when, like even like in our neighborhoods when there's like talk about how to respond to a lot of the changes we're seeing, like we can bring that perspective of like giving power over, and like taking those stories and not just allowing them to be heard, but allowing them to be heard and then acted upon, which is how I was that's kind of how I've reconciled it. It's not hopeful. I don't feel any better about it, but yeah.
Well, thanks, Maura. No, I don't mean to bring everyone down or anything. I think honestly that it's sort of brick by brick. I mean, we do. It matters that we're trying, and that we're you know, we're reading, and it's not all going to happen instantly. We're not all of a sudden going to be like, we solved this problem, you know, and there's no longer racism, and there's no longer this. I mean, of course, it's not going to be that way, but it's something that we have to keep working on. Tonal shift, you know. Oh, I see Pam's hand is up. Pam, talk to us, Pam Gardo.
Yeah. You know, it goes back to the whole thing about stories and storytelling and fiction building empathy. And I think one of my takeaways is that when we read books like this, as white privileged people, we build more empathy. It changes people's perception of what's happening, and enlists us to be allies in the process. And so when the Black Lives Matter movement came out after you know, Floyd's death, there were a lot of white people in that mix, and there were a lot of people that had more power than perhaps some of the people, other people that were demonstrating, and you know, maybe they were contacting their legislators, and maybe, you know, like the whole rally that got the police chief fired, you know, recently up in New York. You know, that builds power in advocates.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So again, thanks to everybody who took the time tonight and talked about what was not an easy read. So yeah, I was dubbing this hard books and bars, and there's some talk in the chat of maybe for hard books and bars, there's a hard cocktail recipe that's sent ahead of time, and we can all make it at home. I'm happy to do that. Hard books and home brews or something like that. I used to suggest, I used to make a playlist and suggest a drink, so I could continue that. The next book we're doing in 2 weeks is on the 23rd. It's a big shift tonally. It's called A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and it is by Becky Chambers. It is a space opera. There are different races, different species all together on a ship. There's some sex, there's not a lot of violence, and it's a lot of fun, actually. It's kind of a hangout character study, less than a hard sci-fi plot-driven book. I think you'll grow to like the characters and the relationships, and maybe find you know, something different in there that we haven't read in a while. So please check that one out. If you haven't looked at the chat tonight, there's a lot of stuff to look at before I close it out. Thank you to anyone who tips me, the moderator. I appreciate that. Thank you. Also, if you get your books through bookshop.org, that link of all of the 2021 books I'm thinking about, Books and Bars benefits a bit from that, and they share the proceeds with other independent bookstores. And again, thanks to the Friends for supporting Books and Bars tonight. Please check out their Opus and Olives event. We're at booksandbars.com. We have our YouTube page. I make these videos, I edit them, and I put them up on YouTube. So feel free, if you want to get a friend involved, you can share this video. Go to our YouTube page and subscribe to that. Any questions, just send me an email or anything, and I'm happy to add books to our list. And I'm really excited about continuing this with you guys for twice a month, as long as things are the way they are. Someday we'll meet again in person when it's safe. But for now, it's great to see all of your faces here, at least, and see people from all over joining in. So bring your pet next time. If you don't have a pet, that's okay. We can do other icebreakers. It'll be fun. But the 23rd at 7 o'clock is the next one. Links are in the chat. I'll put some more things in the chat real quick, but otherwise, go to our Facebook page or go to booksandbars.com. Any last minute questions, comments from anybody I can address? Otherwise, I will see you in 2 weeks or online whenever you want to reach out. Thanks a lot, guys. Good night.
Night.